So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in because, like a typical professor, I have too many slides to get through and not enough time. GPS and training load monitoring 101. This is the A to Z. If you didn't know anything about what GPS is, how to use it, why you should use it in sport, this is the lecture for you. This lecture is all about the conceptual framework behind why do we even track load and how do these GPS units work. We'll look a little bit at catapult, and in fact we have some definitions here that we're going to start with. Okay, so what is load monitoring? Well, load monitoring, when we talk about that, is a systematic quantification of the physical demands placed on an athlete. Okay, also the biological response to those demands. So not just the demands, but also the athlete's response. And it's designed to guide training and manage adaptation. That's a very important part, because if we don't use the data that we're collecting to actually guide training, then we might as well not be doing it, right? It's just kind of a waste of time. We have to use it to guide something. It doesn't mean that we should jump to conclusions or it doesn't mean we should make any action before we see trends and before we validate those trends, but as long as we have a plan for what we're doing, that's the important part. Now, it's conceptually rooted in Selye's general adaptation syndrome. Some of you are familiar with this probably already, and I'll show you a graph here in a minute. In the GAS, training load acts as a stressor, acute fatigue is induced, then recovery hopefully occurs for our athletes, but we don't just want recovery to occur, we want supercompensation to occur. And there's an opportunity for it after training. And I say opportunity because it's not inevitable. If we dose that load too low, or if we dose a load too high, supercompensation may not occur. Okay? Now let's see a graph of that. Here's a graph, and we can see 3 stages. The alarm phase, okay, that's the first phase after the load is induced, okay? The training load happens, and then there's some sort of a dip in performance, right? They say the best way to get stronger at the bench press is not actually to bench press if you're testing in the same day, because if you want to test your 1RM and you do a bench press session and you test your 1RM right afterwards, you're actually going to be worse at the bench press. If you want to test your flying 30-meter time and you do a sprint workout and then you test your flying 30 right afterwards, right, because time horizons matter for sports scientists and for athletes, then you're going to be slower. And so there's that alarm reaction phase. But then we go into the resistance phase, and that's really where we see the recovery and then the actual adaptation from that load. And so if you're going to test your bench press, you should wait 3 or 4 days after that very intense bench press workout. Or if you're going to test your flying 30, you should wait several days after your last speed session so the athlete is fresh and they're well into the resistance and that adaptive phase. Okay, and then each of these sessions we can see is layering on one another. This could be on a long time horizon, or this could be on a short time horizon. Really, it works for both when we're describing it conceptually. Now, what we want to do is prevent our athletes from getting into this exhaustion phase there at the end, where we give them too much load, and now their ability to supercompensate, to adapt, is it's much less, and even if we get into overtraining syndrome, then now they're going into a state of performance where their performance dips dramatically, and it takes them a long time to recover. Okay, so this load monitoring encompasses both external load and internal load. External is the mechanical or locomotor output, okay? That's like how fast they're going, how many accelerations, the total distance, etc. Internal load is the physiological and psychomotor or psychometric response. So what's in the head and in the body, okay? So heart rate response, session RPE, their rate of perceived exertion for the session. Okay, external and internal. And it aligns with the stimulus recovery adaptation framework, which is very similar to the GAS, and so I won't show a graph of it. Essentially, we're looking at load. A load is only productive if it's followed by adequate recovery. There's a stimulus and then recovery, and if we recover well and the load was not too much and not too little, then we will adapt. Now, all of this, measuring all of this, forms the foundation of what I like to call white box models of training, and that's a concept I learned under Dr. Stone at ETSU. where both the inputs or the stimuli and the response or the outputs are measurable and interpreted in context. Okay, contrast that with a black box approach where we don't really know what the athlete is doing. And for so many years, that's how training was. Whatever the coach said for that day, whatever the strength and conditioning staff, if there was one, told them to do on the field, the athletes did it. But there's no real tracking or monitoring of it. Although the best coaches do write down what they do and they look at their notes, but they couldn't quantify it. Qualitatively, they might know, okay? But that's where the art of coaching was so heavily developed, and the science of coaching sometimes lags a little bit behind. Now, every good coach is a kind of a scientist in his or her own right, because they're taking notes and they're reflecting and they're looking back on data, but they're just not able to quantify in the same way that we can with some of the technology that we have today. Okay, so here's a look at that white box approach. We have the inputs, and this is not all encompassing. I just did my best to add most of the things that I could think of here. These are all the inputs to the athlete. Outside stressors, that's one that we often forget about. Okay, outside stressors like, I work in the collegiate setting, so did one of our athletes break up with his girlfriend or break up with her boyfriend? Do they have finals? Do they have a midterm in my class, that they're stressed out when they come to do testing with me? And so those things are important to consider. Of course, training load, how fast are they training? What's the density of training? The training methods. I'm not going to go through each of these, but all of these things play into the actual training that they're doing. We should know what's in it, okay? We know what's in the box. And when I say box, I'm talking about just the overall athletic preparation for the season, which then leads to the current win-loss record, okay? So when we look at the season, all right, we know that on sport, it doesn't work itself out on paper, okay? The whole reason why we play the game, why we participate in the sport is in order to have the contest and to have a good match, right? 50 and 50, equally matched, so to speak. That's why we are so excited about the championships, because we know that those teams have risen to the top through the ranks and are competing, and they are the best of the best, and we know that they are somewhat evenly matched. And so on paper, you can't really determine who's going to win. But when you look at every team's final result, and then you look at their training, what we can do is we can start to say, hey, because we know what was in the box over here, all these inputs, maybe we can tweak some of those things so that we can modify the win-loss record for the next season. And that's really what sports science is all about. It's about quantifying what's in the box.